Hello, hello, Camino. How are you doing?
Hi, Stefan, how are you?
Very, very, very good. Um, I would like to give the floor in a sequence that is from looking at the problematic that is impacting everyone today, and wanted to start with the evidence problematic of attacking healthcare in the context of COVID-19, and then building from this problematic with our other speakers when it comes to what is the situation for access to food, what is the situation when you want to ensure peace mediation, and what does it mean, practically speaking, if you want to help population to build a cyber peace solution. In that regard, Christopher, would you like to open with us when it comes to your reality as a healthcare professional in the midst of this pandemic?
Sure. Good day, all, and thank you for having me. The recent times have been very tough on healthcare. Despite the COVID outbreak, which has been challenging, all of the cyber attacks in healthcare have made it a particularly challenging time for those in healthcare. One of the big issues with healthcare in regards to cybersecurity is anything that can lead to a delay in patient care can have an adverse impact on patient health. We've seen this in a lot of factors. For example, there was a study years ago that showed if you had a heart attack during a marathon, because it took an ambulance a couple of minutes longer to get you to a hospital, you had a much worse health impact. We're seeing some of the same types of stuff with ransomware and other outbreaks, because when those computers go down, when the medical system devices become unavailable, those lead to delays in patient care. Anything that leads to a delay in patient care can bring about adverse health outcomes. One of the things in healthcare that's becoming a really increasingly important message is that in a modern hospital, cybersecurity is a critical component of patient safety. And that's been heavily demonstrated the last couple of years. You've had hundreds of hospitals go down due to ransomware attacks. And what's particularly disturbing is that as COVID is surging in a lot of cities throughout the world, a lot of the hospitals treating those COVID patients have fallen victim to ransomware attacks, which creates double difficulties for healthcare organizations. Not only do you have to deal with a surge of patients, but often have to deal with computer systems that are down, medical devices that go down, which make it harder to treat patients on top of the surges. So it's been a very challenging time for healthcare.
Thank you, Christopher, for opening with this. It's very interesting to see that as this phenomenon still is not new when it comes to attack on the healthcare, it took another spin in the midst of this pandemic. And looking into the impact on human security, the way you just described, lead us also to look into other fields, other critical need that needs to be fulfilled for population, and how the organizational services around them see their capacity against the online threat. So, Gina, if you would like to touch upon this from the point of view of the World Health Organization.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan, and congratulations on your anniversary. So let me focus on food security, because we all know by now that there is a very close link between food security and peace, and conflict and food insecurity and hunger. So they feed each other. In the current context of COVID, we have seen how digital technology has really played out in the way we provide assistance to those affected by crisis. In fact, we could say in the World Food Program that the COVID emergency response is probably one of the one of the first instances where our response is very much data-led, because it has, we've used digital technology and data a lot to inform our decisions in the World Food Program. So generally, there's already a big impact of digital technology or cyber, of anything that has to do with data and technology in the way the food systems are going. So we've seen automation, reducing, fine-tuning inputs. We've seen the use of AI, machine learning, and remote sensing in agriculture. We've seen traceability technologies such as blockchain and digital logistics services that are used to streamline agriculture and food supply chains. So there are a lot of emerging trends in the food sector that's being seen with the use of data. Now, with regard to emergency response, there has been quite a tremendous there have been tremendous opportunities with the use of technology. So let me give you some examples on how the World Food Program had taken advantage of this. With the use of our digital platform CodeScope, we have been able to transfer, as of September this year, $1 billion cash to our beneficiaries. And this is in the midst of global restrictions to travels and movement of population. So without technology and without, connection to fintech and connections to other forms of mobile money, etc., we would not have been able to achieve this in an unprecedented manner and in a way that is fast and efficient and effective. So when transport networks also went down in the early months of the pandemic, 51 humanitarian organizations across the world had used the WFP's Emergency Service Marketplace to ship nearly 50,000 cubic meters of health and humanitarian cargo to 165 countries. So this really shows that even in times of crisis, with digital technology, we're able to speed up humanitarian delivery to populations in need. And then, of course, there are other examples, such as the use of drones that's enabling connectivity and imagery in the way we map where hunger is and where there is a prevalence of food insecurity. But just to highlight here, there are a lot of opportunities to use digital technology and data to promote food security. However, there are also challenges to it. There are the issues of data protection, there are the issues of digital inclusion, digital literacy that still have to be managed and to be inculcated across the humanitarian community, across the development community, both also among staff as well as the populations in need. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Gina. It's very interesting. I was taking notes in terms of what you described, and Kerstin touched upon this before, in terms of that technology is a key enabler, an accelerator to humanitarian delivery. And that's very important to see that this trend is growing. And at the same time, the risk going with it when it comes to the security of this infrastructure, this network, the digital literacy that is needed for workers just to understand what is happening is also then at stake. I'm just going now to Camino because it's very also interesting to understand that we saw the challenge when it comes to access to food or access to health, but also communities that are specifically impacted or vulnerable in this in the cyberspace. If Camino, you want to share some words with us about this, thank you.
Yeah, sure, Stefan. First of all, happy birthday to the Cyberspace Institute. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you. So one of the many hats I wear involves work that I am undertaking with the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs on the impact of digital technologies on the practice of mediation. This is very different from the work I do with UNIDIR and others on international security issues because it's more associated with the third-party mediation in non-international conflicts. So first I'd say, also with my war studies background, that while often deemed revolutionary, especially in strategic or war studies, digital technologies do not in themselves bring revolutionary change at all to the practice of mediation. But if leveraged properly, some of the technologies can bring efficiencies and opportunities to mediation efforts. They can expand the mediator's ability, for example, to understand the character of a conflict and the shifting dynamics of a negotiation, as well as facilitate engagement with the conflict parties. But at the same time, they also bring significant risks. So today's, we need to step back a little bit first because today's civil conflicts, as has been written about significantly, are highly fragmented and increasingly internationalized, involving multiple internal and external actors. They last much longer, are more intractable, and tend to be a lot less conducive to traditional political settlements. But above all, it's in these contexts where societies are much more vulnerable and likely to be more affected by the misuse of digital technologies, and often where states and non-state actors showed much less restraint in their behaviors. So digital tech are increasingly relevant in these contexts, which is where most mediation efforts generally take place. So mediating or facilitating a solution to these kinds of conflicts is already significantly difficult. It's highly complex, it's a very human-intensive and trust-dependent endeavor. So for mediators and others engaged in peacemaking efforts, understanding the challenges that digital technologies can bring about in the context they're working on is critical to designing their engagement strategies. So just in terms of the common challenges that one can identify in these contexts, so these include data breaches, information leaks, and other breaches of confidentiality, monitoring and surveillance, including for targeting purposes, internet shutdowns, hacking devices to disrupt or corrupt information flows or spread misinformation and disinformation, and competition for control of critical internet resources. These are things that we're seeing increasingly in civil armed conflicts. And while not yet evident in these contexts, it's highly likely that cyber capabilities will be used in the future alongside other capabilities to disrupt or sabotage infrastructure upon which one or other party relies for their own strategy. So some of these uses can definitely lead to escalation of tensions between the parties and are increasingly viewed as contributing to the intractability of deepening or ongoing conflicts. This reality presents important challenges to conflict and crisis management in general, and to mediation in particular, and there are spillover effects into areas that, for example, Gina works on. The humanitarian consequences in some places are exacerbated by the non-resolution of these conflicts. So over the past couple of years, just to provide a little bit of insight into some of the approaches that are being taken to better understand and resolve and find solutions to these new developments. So I've been working with the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs on a project relating to digital technology and conflict prevention, including on mediation. And the first phase of the project led to the publication with the Humanitarian Dialogue Center on a report called Digital Technologies and On-Conflict Mediation. I will do some advertisement here. The findings of this report stress that mediation practitioners have a responsibility to understand the opportunities and risks associated with digital technologies in conflict settings. And we found that they're particularly apparent, these risks, in 4 areas relevant to mediation, including how technologies, as Kristen mentioned, can enable conflict analysis, that enabling function, but also how the uses of digital technologies in conflict need to be factored into conflict analysis. How also a mediator's engagement with the conflict parties, whether in person or through virtual channels, which is the case during the pandemic, is affected by by technology. How it affects efforts to ensure greater inclusivity, which is a very important principle in mediation, and how it affects strategic communications. I'll stop there, but there's quite a bit more in terms of managing risk, et cetera, and cyber hygiene that we can discuss afterwards.
Thank you very much, Camino, for this. That's interesting that a lot of what you describe is very aligned with what was mentioned before by Christopher and Gina, because the scale of attack, the threat landscape, there's a risk of attack, so purely cyber attack, but also espionage and also sabotage and also campaign of disinformation to undermine legitimacy, something that we find in other fields. So interesting to see these commonalities whilst we are looking at very different fields. Thank you, Camino, for sharing. To continue looking at this from another lens, we'd be curious to hear from Yannick. When you're running program in order to help implementing solution to address these challenges, what are the key factors that you have in mind? And welcome, Yannick.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, and thanks to the Cyberspace Institute for this opportunity. I'm working as partner for OnePoint, which is a transformation architect, working for companies and public agencies and nations in their transformations, mainly digital transformation, but also business and business model transformations. And based on the experience, starting with the last COVID-19 crisis, we have been able to demonstrate, as you said, that a lot of the businesses and a lot of the nations are able to move a huge part of their activity, starting by buying, by selling, by working a lot on digital. It has been not easy, but it's moving at a fast speed. The same goes for a lot of the activity, and as the growth we see obviously the risk of digital coming as a full reality. Typically, we believe that the next challenges will be on three pillars in the coming years. Definitively, health and food and digital securities will be what we can call the new pillar of securities, something that we need to ensure for every citizens and every people everywhere. And of course, it goes end to end. As said by Gina, more and more food and will be food security will be managed through technology. Is the same for health, and we have a kind of hopefully a virtuous cycle we need to put in place between three levels of securities and risk management. What does it mean really is today we believe that we have just touched the surface. That means if you look at what happened on the health sector, and the past few weeks has been very hectic for most of the CISO or for most of the IT people working in the hospital. And thanks, Chris, for your testimony. It has been a real challenge. We saw that the attacks, the cyber attacks, go by during the COVID crisis by more than 600 or 700%. Then it's a huge. Currently, there is a lot of. I was just looking at the news yesterday about some attacks in Switzerland, some attacks in the Vermont Hospital, the University of Vermont Hospital. Most of it is linked to cyber security or cyber crime. I mean, people asking for ransom, blocking system, and so on. And we believe it's only the surface because, as you said, behind the cyber security, behind the cyber crime, there is always the potential of the cyber war or the cyber terrorism. And today, most of our most of the medical devices are connected and then could be vulnerable to some attack. We are using more and more remote care, which is also another factor of attack. Then what we believe needs to happen is really a change of paradigm in the way we build this project, how we build the programs, and how we establish the new level of security and health sector especially. And coming back to that, it's really about how we change the way we design, thinking, design the medical devices, design the various aspects of an hospital or healthcare provider, starting with security at the core of the design. We talk a lot about security, privacy, and resilience by design, making sure that we take that full end-to-end, from the conceptions to the implementations to the run, making sure that we have the right level of awareness and training for everyone, including, of course, the people working in the hospital, but also the people visiting the hospital about the risk of cyber. It goes after that, of course, by a huge collaborations in terms of information exchange and in the way we manage it. And of course, at the end, how we can get the support when incidents happen and how we manage incidents. And that goes to the Camino example of the importance of the mediations in case of in such incidents. Then again, we believe that in the coming years and starting next year, most of the studies show that there will be a huge increase of the ransomware attacks. They'd say multiplied by 5 or 6 at least compared to this year. And that means it's an occasion for everyone to think about the cyber resilience in terms of how I will protect my IT, my infrastructure, my informations, but mainly my operations, and how I can have a real plan in order to secure all that. Thanks a lot, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Very informative. Thanks for this. It's interesting to see that whatever digital transformation we want to put in place, which means making sure that I mean, different audience in different regions, different countries can not only understand the challenge, but also have the resources and the capacity to implement the responses, is a moving target. Because whilst multi-stakeholder initiative are trying to provide support or digital transformation, then the landscape changes and the threat change. So very interesting to see. To continue looking into potential solution, because we all know that in this context, and we saw that because we have fields like health, food security, peace mediation, digital transformation, how what is learned in one field can really inform another one. So how do you make sure that we can exchange information in between these very different fields? And if it's possible for you to share some word with us about this, Jean-Pierre, would be appreciated.
Sure, with pleasure. Thanks for having me here, and again, happy birthday to you indeed. Congratulations for setting up this the institute. So I had a few slides I'm happy to share unless you want to do it yourself. It's so I've been instructed to not do it myself, but this is what it is about. Just a few slides to make things even more concrete. So if you go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about privacy conscious sharing. I'm not sure the whole slide is visible on the screen, but I guess it's nevertheless understandable. So the title of the slide is multi-site studies. So the idea here is that one of the main issues that the health sector is facing is actually the ability to share information, make sense of information that is currently very much in silos, typically in various hospitals. So how do you reconcile all this information, knowing that in most cases it is not possible to transfer the data? It's not possible to transfer the data for the variety of reasons. You know, it can be data protection rules, it can be the unwillingness and retention of the data, and so on and so forth. So how do we essentially move on and solve this issue is absolutely crucial. As we have seen during the pandemic so far, this problem absolutely needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So if you go to the next slide, or if you're, well, so this is something that we have done lately. We have managed to develop, let's say, software solutions. And we are not the only ones. I take this just as an example of a solution that we have developed and deployed in 3 Swiss university hospitals, and that make it possible to share the data in that level. So if we go to the next slide, so if you go to the next slide, this is shown. This shows how this works in a nutshell. So if there's a willingness to explore a given cohort, so a set of patients that are in different locations, it's possible to generate requests and obtain information without having to transfer the data. And please, next slide. You'll see on the next slide how the outcome looks like. So you see here, you get a kind of a breakdown of the whole thing in terms of how many patients can be found in the different institutions. And here again, the data have not been transferred. This has been realized by appropriate, let's say, cryptographic solutions that are now very well mastered. Once the cohort of patients have been identified, then one moves to the next step, which is the analysis of this cohort. So if you move to the next slide, we'll have the gist of it. So the analysis is, okay, we've identified there are a total of 7, let's say, patients or scattered over 3 hospitals. And then one can apply appropriate statistical solutions in order to extract information out of this. And for example, compare the efficacy of different, let's say, treatments as shown on the next slide. So if you move to the next slide, please. You will see here, for example, on this plot, you see on the x-axis, you see the, let's say, survival of patients, and on the vertical axis, you see the likelihood. In this case, in this way, it is possible to compare the efficacy of 2 medicaments, blue one or red one, and one can see here that clearly the blue one is superior to the other one. So this we have done in the framework of oncology in Switzerland. And if you move to the next slide, let me mention this can be brought at scale for the sharing of, for example, COVID data. And so we are now collaborating with a number of partners that you see depicted on this map. So many partners in the US, but also partners in Nigeria, in Israel, and in various places in Europe. So let me now move to the conclusion of this very short presentation. So, which is on the next last slide. So, the message I want to convey here is it is possible to extract information out of the data sets without transferring them, and which means in this way there is no loss of control. And as a consequence, there is going to be a high motivation to share the data and a high willingness to harmonize the data formats, which leads to less paperwork and streamlining the work of ethics committees. And this is based on techniques that I don't have the time to explain here, but that I mentioned here on the slide. And we've deployed this, and we've shown how it works. So, in a nutshell, the message I want to convey here is that health data nowadays needs to be brought to the 21st century, right? We have done this has been done in the financial sector. We do e-banking, we do m-banking on a regular basis. We are not there yet on the side of health, and I hope this pandemic will be the opportunity to have a full understanding of the magnitude of the problem, and that appropriate solutions are going to be deployed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Very informative, and thank you for sharing to the mechanics of the challenge of information exchange, and already demonstrating that we can already move into thinking about solution, providing concept and solution that will allow to solve part of the problem. And in fact, from this, I would like to build a question from the panel, also looking into what we're receiving online, is how much do you feel that you, I mean, not panelists per se, but the field is learning from each other? Is there something like you're mentioning, Jean-Pierre, in the end that a certain level of maturity of information exchange, for example, in the financial sector, is not yet implemented into the healthcare, whilst reverse, the criminal innovation that is present in against the financial sector for long has already been used in order to attack the healthcare. So it looks like that on one end, it's difficult to benchmark or to benefit from best practices. On the other end, if you're a criminal group or a group that is used by a state to conduct an attack, it's way easier to exchange these best practices. So, I mean, question for the panel who wants to jump into that. How do you feel that you can learn from each other?
I think learning across industry verticals is critical. I think healthcare has been an industry that has actually lagged in cybersecurity in particular. One of the problems with healthcare is a lot of the funding for technology and stuff will go to rolling out new medical technologies. They don't often focus as much on the cybersecurity aspects of that. And this is particularly interesting in the time of COVID right now, because you often hear it said that COVID has forced 10 years of digital progress in a matter of a few months, and there is some truth to that. But it's also one of the things that's leading to a lot of the cybersecurity problems within healthcare today. Because one of the things is hospitals rush to roll out telehealth. They rush to roll out remote access. They rush to roll out all these technologies in order to deal with the pandemic, but often didn't think about the cybersecurity repercussions of the technologies they rolled out. So yes, that increased remote access is great, but did they take the time to actually see how it increased their attack surface, made them more vulnerable to certain types of cyber attacks? And that's the kind of analysis that a lot of hospitals didn't take the time to do. They just went ahead and rushed the technology out. So I think hospitals are largely playing catch up still. I think it's going to be true for the next several years. Although I do think the message is starting to come across where hospitals are beginning to pay more attention to cybersecurity. And as more investment does happen in that area, I think you will begin to see healthcare begin to catch up.
Thank you, Christopher. Gina, if I can ping you on that one, do you feel it's that you're facing the similar challenges, if not threats, in the food security context, that solutions are being engineered, maybe too fast, cutting corners when it comes to security or data protection or privacy? What's your feeling on this?
I cannot speak for the rest of the humanitarian community, but in WFP, I mean, we take data protection and data security very, very seriously. We have, in fact, strengthened, our work on cybersecurity, and it's grown. It's maturing quite well in the organization, and we have, we we take a lot of learning from private sector as well, from cutting edge, organizations and firms, so that and as well as some regulations that exist across, especially on data protection, the GDPR and other countries that have started to institute data protection regulations. So there are a lot of things that we are learning across the globe, and I think though organizations can be very unique in their own ways, but there are very similar processes that organizations can learn from each other, and similar technologies and mechanisms that we can institute, so that there is also interoperability, which is very important to ensure safety and protection of data. Because if we are also using different methods and ways of securing data, it's and that interoperability is difficult. It also kind of undermine each other's processes. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Gina, and for bringing also the complex challenge of interoperability in the conversation, and it ties quite nicely with what Jean-Pierre was explaining before. We have a question from the audience. I just read it. What does the panel think is the biggest current blocker to ensuring nations are acting more responsible in cyberspace? Camino, can I ping you on that one?
Yeah, sure. There are many responses to that. I think currently we have the pandemic, which provides an excuse not to act on certain things. There are also a range of geopolitical issues that are, I wouldn't say preventing, but provoking different reactions and different approaches to the question of acting responsibly in cyberspace. I mean, one could easily fall back on the crutch of the challenges of attribution, but I think that deserves a conversation in itself. And I think on the attribution issue, there have been significant advances, at least at the technical level. And then it's up to the state itself to decide whether, based on a legal assessment, whether it wants to assign responsibility for a certain activity or not. But I think we can't look at cyber-related issues and irresponsible behaviors absent a broader analysis of the context within which this activity is taking place. Is it related to something broader? Is it related to ongoing negotiations? Is it related to other tensions? For example, within an actual ongoing conflict, evidently there it's easier to make an assessment. Sometimes regarding activity in peacetime, it's a little bit more difficult, but there generally tends to be some reason for that behavior. And that's not saying that that behavior is justified, but I think being able to do that cross-domain analysis and to be able to understand the behaviors and then be able to understand what response is required in such a situation is important. As I think everybody knows, both those participating in this panel and those are on the other side of it, there are processes underway at the moment within the UN General Assembly looking at norms of responsible behavior and trying to move closer to understanding how adherence to those norms of responsible behavior can be fostered. But Unidir and Kristen, I'm sure would be happy to also discuss that. She hasn't done so already, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Camino. It's, I guess it's critical to this conversation today that for everyone to understand that thinking the problematic through the lens of cybersecurity only or technology only is not going to provide any solution at scale or that will be sustainable. the ambition of Cyberpeace is more complex, and you're just mentioning it. Can you know that context is important, geopolitical context, and also and that will be good that we touched upon this, if we start going into the challenges of attribution, and how this link also with accountability. How do we track accountability when it comes to obligation of actors, and do they live up to their obligation? Is also part of the element to have in mind. And we have a panel later today very focused on accountability, so thank you for the opener. A question when it comes to the difficulty, the practical difficulty to learn from each other field. And Jean-Pierre, you were mentioning this complexity of exchange information in the healthcare. How do you think that the communities that we are trying to serve understand this problematic, and how ready they are to implement capacity, tools, new digital literacy in order to overcome this complexity?
Yeah, so thanks for insisting on this, because I think this is indeed, Stéphane, a major issue. I've been working, I'm a computer scientist, but I've been working very, very extensively with hospitals and medical doctors and bioinformaticians. And this is really a recurring problem, that reaching a level at which the quality of the data that are provided and the homogeneity in terms of formats is at par with what is needed. We are not there yet. I mean, people should know that we are not there yet. There exist standards of all kinds, which is good, right? A lot of effort has been put on that front, but it's a very difficult issue. And so the analogy with the financial sector can be interesting up to a certain point. We have to understand that the health sector is way more challenging in terms of the nature of the data. Financial sector is about essentially, how amounts of money, and then, dates, time, and so on, right? In the health sector, it's way, way more diverse. The number of devices from which data are gathered and obtained is very diverse as well. And as Chris would certainly confirm, there's a problem of aging of some of these devices that may be somewhat obsolete, but still out there in operation. So what is really needed is the incentive that will facilitate and will encourage people to do a proper job in terms of data formatting and data curation. And currently these incentives are missing to some extent, because people are sitting on their own data. Retaining data is retaining control and retaining also a sort of competitive advantage in terms of publication, which also matters in this field, of course, right? So people are very, very, very cautious on their data. And now if we can bring this distinction between extracting information without losing the control of the data, which I know is pretty abstract, but is doable actually. This is, I think, is going to be a big leap and will facilitate the whole process.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for this. What you were saying at the very end, this notion of control that could go in the way to systemic solution when we have to think collectively how to better implement a solution to help this human security in this field is very important. Our control sometimes is not the same as empowerment. So thank you for raising this. The last question from the audience is how can we ensure security of basic resources for vulnerable communities in developing countries? So Yannick, if you would like to take that one.
Yeah, sure, Stéphane. Thanks a lot for that. I think coming back to that issue is really about defining some kind of high-level standards that could be shared by some nations. I think it's a common point, and there has been few initiatives like the Paris Call, obviously, in order to set up some common understanding on what is the risk linked to cyberspace and how we need to deal with that level of security. Definitively, what you are doing at the Cyberpeace Institute is a key element in that direction, having an overall framework that could be looked at the international level. After that, practically, it's about defining two elements of security. Again, part of every project and every directions, ensuring maybe some international benchmark and how much is being done by every nations or every groups on establishing the right cyber resilience level for their country. And I would say definitively promoting cyber security through awareness to every populations. And finally, and I think this is something that you are taking care of in some part, having some international groups ready for interventions or ready for supports in case of incident.
Thank you, Yannick. And yes, we'll also have the opportunity to debrief on some very specific activities that are done in this field. One among them, the project Cyber for Healthcare, in order to deliver this really tangible support to the one in need. Thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists for joining us today. Again, I would have really liked to welcome you here in Geneva, but thank you for the time that you took.